Welcome back, everyone. This is The Revenue Governor, and I am April, your host. Over the last 5 episodes, we've examined several leadership moments. Now, at first glance, they might feel like separate ideas. They might even seem like different problems, maybe different leadership situations. Here's the thing. They all reveal the same pattern. Revenue governance rarely collapses in a dramatic moment. It drifts, slowly. You see it without even seeing it. And what makes the drift so dangerous is that leaders almost always recognize the signals before the system fails. The challenge, my friends, is not awareness. The challenge is acting while everything still appears fine. Preparation. Because most governance failures begin during periods when the organization still feels healthy. Your pipelines, well, they still look strong. Your forecast calls, those probably still sound confident. Nothing truly appears broken, and that is usually when the system begins drifting to begin with. In episode 1, we examined a moment most leaders recognize. You see the problem early. A rep, well, they're struggling. A deal feels unstable. A forecast assumption does not quite hold together. So you try something. Maybe it's a conversation, a coaching moment, a small adjustment. Nothing dramatic happens, though. Not immediately, anyway. So the system keeps moving. And this is where leadership reality becomes uncomfortable. Most problems inside revenue organizations, they are not missed. They are recognized and delayed. Leaders often see the issue, but they hesitate to intervene while the numbers still look acceptable. And that hesitation allows the system to keep reinforcing the same behavior. By the time the problem becomes obvious to everyone, the cost of correcting it is so much higher. That was the first signal. Leadership saw the problem, but the system kept moving. And that brought us to when you tried but didn't act. In episode 2, we examined something that sounds positive on paper: reasonableness. Leadership culture often celebrates this. Be patient, be supportive, give people time to improve. Those instincts come from a good place. But revenue systems do not operate on good intentions. They operate on standards, and when standards begin to soften in the name of reasonableness, the system learns something quickly. Accountability is flexible. Leaders rarely notice this shift when it begins to happen because everyone sounds supportive. Meetings, they feel collaborative. Underneath that tone, though, something important is happening. The organization is slowly redefining what acceptable performance looks like. And that quiet redefinition is often where governance begins drifting. That is the cost of being reasonable. Episode 3, we work through a moment almost every leader has experienced. You're in a meeting, a pipeline review, a forecast discussion, a leadership call, you name it. Something about the number does not feel right. The explanations sound confident. The structure underneath, though, it's very thin. Everyone senses it. No one names it directly. The room, however, they know, and the meeting continues. This is one of the most interesting psychological dynamics in revenue leadership. Because one room collectively recognizes a problem and no one says it out loud, the system learns something very quickly. Silence is acceptable. And once silence becomes acceptable, governance becomes much harder to maintain. That moment is really dramatic, but it's incredibly revealing because it tells how much discipline actually exists inside the sales culture. The room knows. By episode 4, we move from leadership psychology to system structure, the governance gap, the difference between what leadership declares and what the system actually reinforces. Most organizations believe their standards are clear. Pipeline, well, they're disciplined. Deals are inspected. Forecast, it's accurate. But if you observe behavior inside that system, you often see something truly different. Deals move stages without verification. Managers, well, they rely on judgment instead of inspection. Confidence replaces evidence, and this is why we have a governance gap. The distance between stated standards and operational behavior. Most organizations underestimate how wide that gap has become until the forecast actually begins slipping. This led to our final concept in the first arc, episode 5. The governance drift is difficult to see. Well, how do leaders measure it? That question is what led to the development of the arbiter diagnostic. Because governance problems rarely appear first in the numbers, they appear first in the behavior. Inspection habits change. Deal progression becomes less disciplined. Managers, they begin to rely on instinct more than structure. The diagnostic exists to identify those signs early. before the forecast actually starts slipping, before leadership meetings become reactive, before the organization itself is forced to explain what went wrong. When you step back and look at all 5 episodes together, a clear pattern emerges. Revenue systems rarely fail because leaders lack intelligence. They fail because the system slowly teaches everyone which standards actually matter. If deals move forward without inspection, people learn inspection is optional. If confidence replaces evidence, well, people learn optimism is sufficient. And once the system begins reinforcing the wrong behavior, the numbers eventually follow. This is actually why governance drift is so difficult to detect. Everything still appears normal. Pipelines are still growing, forecast calls, they're still sounding confident, meetings are still productive, but the underlying discipline inside the system, that is quietly changing. And everyone feels it, but no one knows how to fix it. Now this brings us to the next series of briefings. Instead of examining leadership moments themselves, we are going to examine something a bit more operational. Inside Arbiter, we refer to them as revenue control signals. Small signals that appear inside pipeline behavior, forecast discussion, and deal inspection. Signals that reveal when revenue discipline is starting to weaken. These signals appear long before the forecast collapses, but organizations overlook them because they appear harmless. All right, let's stop for just a moment and talk through what this could look like. Maybe a deal that's advancing without real buying signals. A conversion assumption that no one has yet verified. Your pipeline growth that is not supported by conversion math itself. Individually, these moments do not seem dangerous. Collectively, though, they reveal something extremely important. The system is beginning to drift. Forecast failure rarely begins when the number misses. It begins early, way earlier, in quiet leadership moments. Moments when the signal is already visible, but the system keeps moving forward anyway. The first 5 episodes examine those moments. The next series will examine the signals that follow. Because if leaders learn to recognize those moments, those signals, early enough, revenue governance rarely has to collapse in the first place, which would be amazing, right? What have we learned? We have learned that forecast failure rarely begins when the number actually misses. It begins when leadership sees the signal, but the system keeps moving anyway. Until next time.